Hello friends, my name is AJ and welcome to part 2 of the in-depth review for Unit 8 of AP Computer Science, which is two-dimensional arrays. In the last part of the video, I went over the review of the entire topic, and in this video I'm going to be going over the practice test that I made for this topic. It has 10 multiple choice questions as well as one FRQ, and you can definitely, if you haven't already, go into the comment section and download it for yourself and try it out. And again, in this video I'm going to be going over all the answers as well as going through an explanation of all of the answers. Alright, without further ado, let's get started. Okay, so we can get started here with number 1. Which of the following are true about two-dimensional arrays? So we can see here all of the elements inside of an array must be of same type or related types. That is definitely true. When creating an array with the keyword new, integers are initialized to 0. That is also true. And remember, this is going to be very similar to arrays when we're talking about default values. And then over here it says the first row of an array is located at index 1. That is not true. Remember, indexes always start at 0. No matter whatever you're doing in Java, they always start at 0. So knowing this, we can say that the correct answer is C, 1 and 2. Alright, for number 2, which of the following describes how two-dimensional arrays are configured? Our answer choices are row major order, column major order, row minor order, and column minor order. The correct answer is row major order. And that we talked about in the last video. That's just something to know, that it is rows first, columns second. And then it says, what is the following syntax to get an element out of a two-dimensional array at row X and column Y? So then we have a bunch of code in order to do it. The first thing I just want to mention right now, it is not D. Remember, the .get method, a lot of people may accidentally mess this up, but the .get method is for array lists, not for arrays, not for two-dimensional arrays. So therefore, D is incorrect. And the correct answer will be C. You first do the name of the array, followed by the number for the row, which in this case is X, and the number for the column, which in this case is Y. So therefore, C will be correct for this particular answer. I'm just going to make my boxes look a little bit better. Just like that. Okay? So C is the correct answer for number 3. Now we're going to go to number 4. Which of the following is the correct declaration of a string two-dimensional array field? So we know that this is a field. It is supposed to be a string two-dimensional array meant to store sensitive data. Meant to store sensitive data. Now this is a type of question which is actually combining different units. This is combining units 5 and unit 8. So when I say field, first thing you should think of is I usually need a public or private associated with fields. And in addition to that, I'm trying to store sensitive data. And because my data is sensitive, I want it to be with the private keyword. So I'll use the private keyword. And if you forget private versus public, definitely check out the Unit 5 in-depth review. I go over all of that in detail. And then here I have the word private, and then I use string, bracket, 2 pairs of brackets, and then the name of my variable, and that's to declare the variable. So B will be the correct answer. If you chose C, the only incorrect thing about letter C is going to be the public keyword. And then same with number D. Static does not apply. There's not enough information to determine whether or not that should be a static field or not. And then the last thing is with A, because it's supposed to be sensitive data, it's missing the entire private or public thing. And because I specified here that it's a field and it should store sensitive data, that should definitely indicate that that it should be private and it should be declared as such. All right, moving on to number 5. Which of the following is the correct initialization of a two-dimensional array that should have 3 rows and 4 columns? And 4 columns. So if you remember, when you are creating an array, right, and you're initializing an array, the first thing you should have is going to be your data type, followed by 2 empty pairs of brackets. So automatically, C and D we can cross off as incorrect because of the numbers in these brackets. You should not have numbers in the brackets in the left part of the assignment operator, or the left of the assignment operator in the two-dimensional array initialization line. Okay, and then over here you simply have a new string. So all of this so far is correct, right? You have new string, but then here you have the different numbers in different orders, right? You have your 3, 4, and 4 and 3. Remember, two-dimensional arrays are row major. Therefore, rows should be first, columns should be second. So 3 is first and 4 is second in this one. 3 rows, 4 columns. So therefore, A is the correct answer for number 5. Now we go to number 6. It says, which of the following is the correct code to store the number of columns? Very, very important. Number of columns. We're not talking about number of rows. In a two-dimensional array A into the NC variable. So then here I have different things. I have a.length, a0.length, a.size, and a0.size. And again, remember even here, my thing is stuck again. I don't know why it continues to do that. Okay, I fixed it this time. In the last video, my the PDF was also getting stuck and it wasn't working, but I was able to fix it this time. So remember here, the dot size is what is incorrect about these two, because dot size along with dot get in the problem right next to it, in problem number 3, that is for array lists. The size method is only for array lists. Don't use it for arrays or two-dimensional arrays. The correct one to use is length. So now we're left with A and B. Well, if we do a.length, we know that a.length is actually going to give us the number of rows. And when we do 0, because remember, right, it is row major order. So in this case, right, it is rows first, because I did not specifically use brackets, right, to select a row. So in this case, I'm doing row here, dot length, and then here I'm doing my two-dimensional array dot length, which tells me the number of rows, but then here I'm doing the length of the row, which is going to give me the number of columns. So this here will be number of columns. They did go over this in the section in the last video where I was talking about traversing arrays. So here the correct answer will be B. Now moving on to question number 7, and this is one where I have some code here. So it says, answer questions 7 and 8 based on the code below. So I have a for loop, one increasing from 0 to the number of rows, and my second one is going from the number of columns down to 0. And I know that because I have array 0.length minus 1, which is the last element or the last column, and then I am decrementing all the way down to 0. So it says, which of the following is accomplished by the code above? So then it says the elements of two-dimensional arrays are printed starting from top left to bottom right, from bottom left to top right to bottom left, and bottom right to top left. So if I think about a table, which I'm just going to draw here so that I can visualize what my code is actually doing, that drew a pentagon. Let's see. That, I don't even know how I got that shape. Okay, here we go. That's a rectangle. So let's say I have my table like this. Just like that. And because I am looking here, I can see that my first value in my code initially runs I is equal to 0. And when j runs for the first time, when j runs, j is equal to the last column, right? The last column inside of my array. So what I'm looking at is I'm looking at my first row, right? Being that my first row here is 0, and my last column. So I'm looking right over here, and I'm actually going to make this yellow so you can see. Last column, first row. And then because I'm decrementing in my columns inside as my inner for loop, I'm actually going to be moving this way down to the end of my row. But when I get to the end of my row, then I move over here, right? Because I am going again now to my second row, which is at index 1, but again, I'm starting over here on the right side, and I'm moving to the left. And then in my last row, I again start on my right side and move all the way to my last element. So really, I'm moving from the top right to the bottom left. So top right, bottom left, C would be the correct answer. And then again, this one and this type of problems, I recommend to draw, especially if you're having trouble visualizing, you just draw it out and work through the loop. That is the best way to answer questions in loops if you're not really sure what is happening, or you're kind of confused at how things are happening. The best way, again, is to, even if it takes a minute, draw a diagram and draw a diagram and work through the loop and do like how I did, where I physically drew arrows showing my direction of how I was going. And then the last thing here, it says, what will result from the code above, or what output would result? So if you look here, I am printing a new line for every single value, and I'm creating an integer array with 4 rows and 4 columns when I'm doing this. So if you look at my answer choices, it says all of the output lines will be 1, nil, 0, 4, and in fact, this should say null probably. This should be null, because null is the equivalent in Java to other languages nil. And then there would be an error because the value inside of the 2-dimensional array were never set. Well, the correct answer is going to be C, because again, and A, B, and D are not correct. I could see how people would say error. You'd be like, hey, I created my array, but I never set the values. But again, if you remember, there are default values that are placed in when you're creating arrays with primitive types, right? So with integers, the default value is 0. For booleans, it is false, right? For doubles, it is 0.0. So knowing that the default value is 0, all of my output lines will result in 0 being outputted, because that's the value that was there, because it was set as default. All right, and then moving on to number 9, which of the following is a valid way of traversing an array from the top left to bottom right? So again, when I'm talking about top left, I'm talking over here, and then I'm moving to my bottom right. So I have a for loop, an inner for loop, and an outer for loop, and then inner for loop, outer for loop, and then I'm printing out I and j. This is correct. This is a textbook example from the other problem. I'm starting from 0, going to the array.length for my actual thing here. Now, you would notice, though, if you read the problem, that my actual thing over here says array.length. And that is the only thing, that this should be array 0.length. Array 0.length. Should be that, again, because this is for my number of rows, and this is should be my number of columns if I'm actually looping. So, if you look closely, would be incorrect. Then down here, I have a for loop, which has a for each loop, which goes through each of my actual rows inside of my array. And then I have a normal for loop, which goes from j equals 0 to my length of my column, and then j++. And then I simply print out the row and then index j. This is a very unique way to do it, but it is definitely correct. It's merging both solutions, using the for each loop and also using the normal for loop. Then number 3, over here, and ignore this extraneous little mark. If you have that on your page, don't worry about that. That shouldn't even be there. But you can see here that there is, again, this time a for loop for my for each loop for my rows, and a for each loop for my columns. This is also the textbook example. So correct answer would be D, 2, and 3. Then that would be correct. It looks like my thing got stuck again. Let's close out, open back in. Okay. That must be a new glitch in this app, which hopefully will get fixed very soon. Okay, number 10, which is the last multiple choice question, it says which initialization of the array variable would result in an integer two-dimensional array the same dimensions as the one in the code below. So it's asking you to look at the code below, figure out the dimensions of that, and then figuring out the number of rows, number of columns, and then creating a blank array with it. So I can take this right over here, and remember I'm in row major order. So what this means is the outer array, which I can represent using this, represents all of my rows. So this is my collection of all my rows, and then in here I have a collection for my columns and columns. So knowing this, and I know that this right here in this box is one row, and this is another row, I can now stack them on top of each other. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Just like that, because these are my rows. And then inside of that, I have each of my columns. I have the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So the number of rows I have is 2, and the number of columns I have are 3. So I can look at my example, and again, row major order, so rows should be first, columns should be second, and B would be the correct answer. All right, everyone, those are all of the answers for the multiple choice question. Again, if you have any questions, definitely leave them in the comment section below. I'll be able to answer them. So we can now move on to section number 2, which is the free response section. And this one is actually pretty easy if you know what the actual question is asking. It's not as bad as some of the previous ones I've done, which were a little bit more difficult. This one should have been a little bit simpler. It says this question involves the management of student assignments that are represented by the battlefield class. So this is not, this should be, this question involves the, this question involves the representation of a battlefield. That is a typo in my document, which won't be in yours. Again, I was using a similar structure from the previous one. So you can see here that I have my class, I have the battlefield class, and I have this data field which refers to battlefield grid. And this is a two-dimensional array of booleans. And then here I have two methods. The first one is hasMine. And it says, returns true if a location on the battlefield has a landmine, and it returns false otherwise. And that'll be implemented in part A. And then B, it says, returns true if a soldier can walk across the battlefield at a given row without hitting a landmine, returns false otherwise. And then it has here an input for the row to cross, and that'll be implemented in part B. All right, so let's get started with part A. It says, write the battlefield method hasMine. This method will return true if there is a landmine at the row and column position in the battlefield grid field, and will return false otherwise. The following representation of the battlefield grid array. So you can see that this is your array. That would be your field, right? And the field, again, is up here inside of my class. It is my data field. And so what true represents a landmine that exists in the area, and false represents that it does not exist in the area. So basically what my all this method needs to do is simply return the value that is at the row and the column that is inputted into the actual problem. Like, for example, you can see here that if my if it was row 3, column 4, you would say that it would return false, that there was no landmine there. So then over here it says, complete the hasMine method below. Returns true if a location on the battlefield has a landmine, returns false otherwise. This is very easy, and in fact can be done in one line, but I'm going to do it in two. So I'm going to say boolean mine at location is going to be equal to, I'm going to use the this dot battlefield grid bracket, right? And then I simply put my row, bracket, column. Now, a lot of people ask me in multiple videos what this dot means. And what the this dot operator allows me to do is it allows me to access the fields and the methods of my actual class that I am in. It is more of a best practice thing. It's definitely not required. So if you don't have it, you know, it's not wrong. It's, again, just a best practice thing to allow you to access fields and methods inside of a class that are a kind of global within the class, that are outside of a specific method. So that is what the this dot actual thing does, because a lot of people have been wondering about that, so I decided that I would say it in this video. I think I said in the last video too, but I wanted to reiterate that it is optional, it's not required, but it is a best practice thing. And then the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say return mine at loc. And that is it. Now this should be in here because it returns, well, no, this should be a Boolean because it returns a Boolean. So that will be, that is also a little bit of a, see, it says Boolean up here, just that wasn't changed in the declaration. That should be perfectly fine in your document. So that is all you have to do. You just have to find the actual location on the two-dimensional array field and then return the actual value that was there. It's very, very simple. It's one of the easiest problems you'll probably actually do on one of my practice tests. Now we can move on to part B. It says write the battlefield method canSafelyCross. The method will return true if the soldier can safely cross the battlefield, represented by the battlefield grid field here, right, without hitting any mines, and will return false otherwise. So you can see it says you must use the hasMine method appropriately to receive full credit. So then you can see here, for example, right, row 2 is the only row that would return true, as it is the only row without landmine. So it's like if a person here, you know, this person can walk all the way across to this other guy without hitting a landmine. Okay? So really what you're doing is you're trying to, and you have your input, right? The input for canSafelyCross is going to be a row. So you just have to look for that row and just check if there are any landmines in it. And that's all you have to do. All right, everyone, we're going to now do the canSafelyCross method. So all we have to do here is all we need is a for loop. We can simply say for, like this, and I can say for int I equals 0. I is going to be less than my this dot battlefield grid dot length, and then I plus plus and now what is my I actually going to represent? Well, it's going to represent my it's going to represent my column. So what I actually want to do is I want to do battlefield grid here and then 0 dot length. And the reason why I want to do 0, let me try to make this a little bit better, dot length I plus plus, is that my I is actually representing my column. The reason why I wanted to represent my column is that I already have the row. I don't need to loop through my rows. So now all I have to do is I can create a little flag. So I can go down here and I can write Boolean canSafelyCross equals true. And then I can say I can have an if statement inside of my for loop. If my this dot battlefield, it's going to copy this over here, this dot battlefield grid, and then row to cross actually don't even need this because I need to use the hasMine Boolean. So I can simply just say if, I think got stuck again, if hasMine, like this, and then I have row to cross, and then I have my I equals true, then I want to say canSafelyCross equals false. Just like that. So basically, if there is a mine at some point, then you cannot safely cross. And then the last thing I can do is I can simply return can safely cross. And again, you have to use this hasMine because that's what it said in the problem. You know, there's sometimes where in the actual test it will ask you must use something appropriately to receive full credit. So in this case, that is what I had to use the hasMine here rather than actually using, like, for example, battlefield grid road across I had to use hasMine because that is simply what the instructions asked me to do. And this should have been hasMine like that because those are my parameters, row and then the column parameter. All right, everyone, if you liked the video, feel free to like and subscribe for more content. If you have any questions, definitely let me know in the comment section below. And then in a few days, I will be going over Unit 9. And Unit 9 is one of the more complicated ones, which is inheritance and polymorphism. All right, thanks for watching.